My name is Linda Carter, and I can still hear the way my father's voice cut through the crowded banquet hall that night. He had a glass of champagne in his hand, a smile stretched across his face, and 100 people waiting for him to say something charming. Instead, he gestured toward me and said, "She's just in the Navy." The room froze for a beat, forks hovering in midair, the music fading into the background, as eyes shifted in my direction. I stood near the edge of the long white linen table, holding a plate that suddenly felt too heavy, my cheeks burning as if every chandelier above me had turned into a spotlight. The country club smelled of polished oak and expensive wine. Waiters moved gracefully in black vests, and conversations had been buzzing about real estate deals and Ivy League acceptances. But the moment my father labeled me with those 4 words, it felt as if the air had thickened, pressing against my chest. This reunion had always been his stage, the grand hall rented every 2 years, so he could remind everyone where the Collins family stood. I knew what I was walking into when I pushed open those glass doors, but nothing prepared me for the sting of being dismissed in front of relatives and family friends who barely remembered the last time they saw me. Their polite nods and glazed-over smiles told me they had already decided I was a minor footnote compared to the lawyers and doctors at the table. I forced a smile because that was easier than showing the mix of anger and humiliation rising inside me. On the outside, I looked calm, but on the inside, I was replaying his words over and over, each repetition sharper than the last. Just in the Navy, as if years of training, sacrifice, and nights spent wondering if I would live to see another sunrise meant nothing. My father's voice carried across the room with confidence, while mine stayed locked behind clenched teeth. I told myself to breathe, to hold it in, but the truth was already carving its place inside me. Growing up in my house felt like living inside a showroom. Every picture on the wall was staged, every dinner felt like a performance, and every word my father spoke carried the weight of expectation. He was a man who measured success by diplomas, titles, and the company you kept. If you weren't aiming for law, medicine, or finance, then you weren't aiming high enough in his eyes. Our home was spotless, with polished stair rails and living rooms no one actually used, except when guests came over. My mother made sure everything looked perfect. Yet behind the shine was a silence that felt heavier than words. She didn't challenge him often, but I saw the way she slipped me small notes of encouragement, her handwriting neat and careful, like she was trying to steady me in a house that often left me feeling invisible. I was 15 when I noticed the JROTC flyer pinned on the school bulletin board. The photo showed students in uniform, standing tall with confidence I envied. Something about it called to me, promising a kind of strength that wasn't measured by grades or resumes. When I brought the form home, my father barely looked at it. He rolled the word around like it was foreign, asking why I would waste my time on something so trivial. He didn't yell. He never needed to. Instead, he sighed, a long, disappointed sound that made the air in the room turn cold. My mother stirred a pot on the stove that was already done, pretending she didn't hear the conversation, though I knew every word weighed on her too. I remember saying quietly that I liked it, that maybe I could be good at it. He only shook his head, muttering that it was a phase, that I was smart enough for something better. That night, I filled out the form anyway. It felt like the first choice I made for myself, even though I knew he wouldn't approve. When I wore the uniform to school, it was as if my spine straightened on its own, my steps sharper, my voice steadier. For the first time, I felt I belonged to something that didn't care about my last name or what college I might get into. But when I came home and showed him my ribbon for marksmanship, he glanced at it like it was a distraction, asking if I had signed up for the next set of SAT prep classes. The contrast in my life was constant. At school, and during drills, I felt strong, noticed, and capable. At home, I felt like a shadow trailing behind his expectations. He collected my cousin's achievements the way other men collected art, bragging about Ivy League admissions and internships like trophies. My accomplishments never fit his collection, so he minimized them until they seemed to vanish. Looking back, I realized the JROTC was more than an after-school program for me. It was a lifeline, a quiet rebellion against the polished image my father worshipped. It was the place where I discovered discipline, resilience, and the kind of leadership that didn't need a corner office or a gold plaque. But at the time, all I knew was that it gave me a reason to keep showing up, even when home made me feel small. That gap between who I was becoming and who he wanted me to be only grew wider. And with every passing year, the silence between us grew louder. I can still picture the night I told my father I was going to enlist. We were at the dinner table, the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filling the room, and the clinking of silverware the only sound between us. My mother sat quietly, her eyes shifting between us like she already knew what was coming. I cleared my throat and said I had made my decision. I wasn't applying to law schools or medical programs. I was joining the Navy. The words landed with a weight I could feel in my chest, but I kept my voice steady, refusing to let the fear of his reaction show. He set down his fork with surgical precision, folding his hands in front of him like he was about to start a negotiation. "You're wasting your potential," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You have the brains for something bigger. Why throw it all away to follow orders the rest of your life?" Each word cut deeper, not because they were cruel, but because they carried the certainty of a man who believed he knew best. My mother stirred her glass of water, the ice clinking softly, but she didn't say a word. The silence, after his statement, felt heavier than the criticism itself. I looked at him, the man who had mapped out my life since I was old enough to read, and realized for the first time that I had no desire to live inside his blueprint. "I'm not wasting anything," I said quietly, though my hands were trembling under the table. "This is my choice. I want to serve. I want to be part of something that matters beyond money or titles." Saying it out loud made me feel exposed, but it also felt like breathing for the first time in years. His eyes narrowed, the corners of his mouth tightening like he was holding back words he didn't want to say in front of my mother. Finally, he leaned back and gave one of those long sighs that had always meant disappointment. "Fine," he said. "If this is your phase, I'll let you have it. But don't come to me when you realize you've wasted your life." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew there was nothing else to say. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I felt the sting of his disapproval more sharply than ever. Yet beneath the hurt was a current of determination, a quiet voice telling me this was the first real decision I had ever made for myself. I had no idea how hard the road ahead would be, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't turning back. The first weeks of training stripped me down to nothing. We ran for miles in boots that rubbed our feet raw, every breath a reminder of how far there was still to go. The ocean was both punishment and teacher, its freezing waves swallowing us whole before we were ordered back onto the sand for another round of push-ups. Hell Week came like a storm with no end. 5 days blurred together into a haze of exhaustion, our bodies pushed past limits we didn't know existed. Men rang the bell in the middle of the compound, 3 strikes that meant they were done. Each clang echoed in my chest like a dare, daring me to give in. My hands split open, my knees ached, and my skin stayed coated in salt and sand. There were moments when I thought I could not stand another second, when the idea of warmth and sleep tempted me more than survival itself. But every time doubt clawed at me, I heard his voice in my head. "She's just in the Navy." Huh. Those words burned hotter than the Pacific's cold. They fueled me when my muscles screamed and my lungs begged for mercy. I clenched my jaw, whispered to myself that I would not quit, and pushed through one more mile, one more drill, one more wave crashing over my head. By the end, I wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but I was still standing. I had learned that toughness wasn't about size or speed. It was about refusing to let go, about choosing not to quit when quitting seemed like the only option. In the silence after the last drill, soaked and shaking, I knew I had earned something no one could ever take from me. The mission began before dawn, the kind of dark that pressed against your skin and made every sound sharper. Inside the transport plane, the red cabin lights painted everyone in muted shadows. I checked my gear 3 times, fingers brushing over straps and buckles like a ritual. The intel had been clear. 7 American engineers were being held in a fortified compound by a well-armed cell. On paper, it was a textbook rescue, but no mission ever stays on paper. We hit the ground hard, dust swirling in the rotor wash as the night air closed around us. The valley was colder than I expected, my breath blooming white behind my mask. Moving toward the compound felt like slipping into another world, each step over jagged rocks, pulling us deeper into the unknown. Our team leader whispered for us to stack up, and my heart slowed into the rhythm we had drilled 1,000 times. The blast tore through the gate, splinters and dust raining down as we surged forward. The corridors filled with smoke and the metallic sting of gunpowder. Shouts echoed in a language I half understood, boots thundering against concrete. I felt the rifle press against my cheek, the sight steadying even as my body buzzed with adrenaline. A man burst into view, eyes wild, weapon raised. I squeezed the trigger once, twice, and he crumpled against the wall before I could think about his face. There was no time to pause. We pushed deeper, slicing through rooms until we found them. The hostages huddled together, eyes wide, dirt streaking their cheeks. One of them whispered, voice trembling, "Are we going home?" The lump in my throat nearly stopped me, but I forced the words out. "Yes, you're safe now." Their shoulders sagged in relief, and for a moment, I felt the weight of why we were there. The exfil route was chaos. The leader of the cell came at us with the confidence of a man used to being feared. His rifle barked into the night, sparks flying off stone walls. My weapon jammed, after a bad magazine change, and instinct shoved me forward before thought could. We collided hard, his breath reeking of blood and hash as we fought in the dirt. Years of training boiled down to elbows, knees, and sheer will. My knife caught the moonlight for a split second before it sank deep. He went still, and I was left gasping, my arms slick with blood that wasn't all mine. Alvarez pressed a bandage against my wound as we pulled the hostages toward the waiting helicopter. Gunfire cracked behind us, tracers carving angry lines through the sky. The bird shuddered as it lifted, the engineers clinging to each other in disbelief. No one spoke. The roar of the rotors drowned out everything except the pounding of my own heart. Back at base, the debrief was clinical. Enemy casualties. Friendly forces accounted for. Hostages alive. Success. The word felt too small for what it had cost. But when I saw the hostages step off the bird and into the arms of their families, I knew it mattered. I didn't think of medals or recognition. I thought of the quiet promise I had made to myself at 15. That I would prove I was more than what my father had called me. And in that moment, I knew I had. The laughter and chatter in the banquet hall carried on as if nothing had happened, until a voice sliced through the noise. My younger cousin, barely out of high school, looked up from his phone with wide eyes. "Wait," he said, louder than he realized. "Isn't that her? She's the SEAL from the rescue." Every head turned, and for a second, I felt the room tilt. Forks clinked against plates as people reached for their phones, scrolling quickly. Screens lit up with headlines, grainy footage glowing in the dim light of chandeliers. There it was, a clip frozen on the moment I had tackled a man twice my size. The flash of a knife, catching the frame before it cut away. Whispers rippled like a current through the hall. "That's her." "No way." "Greg said she was just in the Navy." The words layered over each other until the room fell into a hush heavy enough to crush. My father's face drained of color. The smirk he had worn earlier dissolved as his jaw hung slack. For once, the man who always had the perfect line stood speechless, his drink trembling in his hand. I stood frozen with my plate still balanced in one hand, roast beef and salad looking absurd now under the chandelier light. The questions started firing from every direction. "Was that really you? Did you save them? Did you kill that man?" I deflected, keeping my voice calm, repeating what little I could say. "The hostages made it home safe. My team did our job." But the less I said, the more their imaginations filled in. The clip replayed again on my cousin's phone. That same flash of steel, that same blur of motion. The silence deepened, broken only when a champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the parquet floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. My father's head turned toward me, his eyes wide, his mask stripped away. In that instant, he looked smaller, unmoored, as though the story he had built for years had collapsed, right there, under the chandelier light. He found me near the bar after the party had started to thin, his polished shoes clicking against the floor as he caught my arm. His grip wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to tell me he wasn't letting this moment slip away. Without a word, he led me down a quiet hallway to a small meeting room, the noise of the banquet fading into silence as the door shut behind us. He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders heavy, his eyes bloodshot as if the mask he wore in front of others had cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. Why did I have to find out from a phone screen? I crossed my arms, my heart pounding, and forced myself to meet his gaze. "Would you have listened?" I asked. The question hit him like a strike, and he flinched. "Of course I would have," he said quickly. But even he seemed to know the words rang hollow. I shook my head, the bitterness rising. "You spent years introducing me as just in the Navy. You didn't want to know who I really was. You wanted me to fit into your boxes." His hands tightened, the knuckles pale as he looked down at them. For once, he didn't fire back. No clever retort, no sharp sigh. Instead, his voice softened. "I thought if I minimized it, if I made it small, maybe it would be safer." Do you know what it's like to imagine your only child in combat? To wake every night wondering if someone in uniform will knock on your door? The words hit harder than I expected. I had carried his dismissal for years like a stone in my chest, never once considering it might have been rooted in fear. My throat tightened, and I whispered, "You hid your fear behind contempt." He nodded slowly, his voice raw. "Fear makes you look weak, and I couldn't afford that. Not in business. Not in life." I stared at him, finally seeing not the polished man who ruled every room, but someone stripped bare by the truth. My voice steadied, low but sharp. "I didn't need your fear. I needed your belief." He closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping, and for the first time, I thought I saw regret flicker across his face. The silence stretched between us, heavy but different now, less like a wall and more like the beginning of something breaking open. For most of my life, I let other people define me. I let their words shrink my accomplishments until I almost believed them myself. It took years of training, sacrifice, and moments where quitting would have been easier to finally understand that no one else has the right to measure my worth. What I learned is simple. Strength is not about applause or recognition. It is about choosing your own path and walking it, even when the people closest to you doubt that you can. The hardest part isn't proving them wrong. It's believing in yourself enough to keep going. I share this because maybe you've felt the same. Maybe someone you love underestimated you, and it cut deeper than anything a stranger could say. So I want to leave you with a question. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you love?